Then he asked another, "How much do you owe?" He replied, 100 containers of wheat. And he said to him, "Take your bill and make it 80." And his master commended the dishonest manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the children of this age are more shrewd in their dealing with their own generation than are the children of light. And I tell you, make friends for yourselves by means of dishonest wealth, so that when it is gone, they may welcome you into eternal homes. Whoever is faithful in a very little is faithful also in much, and whoever is dishonest in a very little is dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful with a dishonest wealth, who will entrust you with true riches? And if you have not been faithful what belongs to another, who will give you what is your own? No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Here's your chance. If you want to donate blood and want to miss the sermon, this would be a good time to get out of here, because I'm going to be here for a while. For more than 20 years now, I have been working with first responders, police, fire, EMS people, dispatchers, and talking about stress, crisis management, post-traumatic stress, and how they can manage it. There's a thing that the psychologists and sociologists and all kinds of other ologists have noticed in people that have stress and have survived disasters, is a thing that's called a post-trauma growth. This is very interesting because Martin Luther discovered this 500 years ago, and he called it the theology of the cross. Whatever is. Life can involve suffering, and God comes to us in spite of the things that we might have. And a lot of times they are crises that make us more aware that God is in our midst. The gospel lesson is an example of this, actually, because we have this manager who gets called on the carpet. He's been embezzling. And embezzling, somebody ratted him out. And he wonders, what am I going to do? This is a crisis for him. But before we get into the actual parable, which is considered one of Jesus' hardest parables to figure out, we need to ask some questions. For one thing, in this day and time, in the first century, what does wealth mean? Now, you don't have to actually raise your hand, you don't have to nod, you don't have to do anything, but at one time or other, there are, I'm sure, a few people in this room who have seen poker chips on a table. And in poker chips on the table, you can usually tell who's winning, right? They got the biggest pile of poker chips. Well, the economy at the time was based on the same principle. There is a certain amount, because everybody starts with the same amount of trips. And the one who can take the chips from you because of the value of his cards, he's the winner. Well, the same thing happened in the ancient Near East. The understanding was there's only so much wealth in the world. And the people that became wealthy usually took it from those who were not so wealthy. So right away, wealth and less than nice people were associated together. And so here we have a wealthy person who has a manager. Now this is sugarcoating because we all know at the time there was no such thing as employees. The manager was a slave. The manager happened to be a slave who had a green eye shade and a pencil stuck behind his ear. So he was able to keep account of things. And so he managed the person's wealth, and that was his job. There's another thing have to kind of explore too, and that is children of light. Jesus uses the term that the children of this world are more shrewd than the children of light. Who are the children of light? I'll give you a hint. You sang about it in the first hymn this morning. So that's kind of how we're going to go. This would be another time for people to get up and leave, because I've just given you a hint at how I'm going to end the sermon. No takers. Okay. Another question that we have to ask is, and this is why it's so difficult, is this guy was a crook. This manager was a crook, and yet the owner of the property, the landowner, the wealthy person, congratulated him for being so prudent, being so smart, and able to get money from his debtors, who happened to be poor people. How much do you owe my manager? Well, I'll tell you what, why don't you jot down something? This is exactly when we get into the crisis of the situation. The manager at the time thought that his position afforded him privilege. And it was based on the things that he could count. It was based on things. It was not a relationship, it was a transaction. As much as he could gather, as much as he could skim off the top, that made him important. Not only that, but he had to deal with the debtors, and so they had to do what he told them to do until he got caught. This is the crisis. Here we can talk about the theology of the cross, because a crisis happened. Doesn't make any difference whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. It was a crisis. All of a sudden his world came apart, and he could no longer do the job that he was prepared to do. Why? Because he'd been caught with his hand in the till. This is a crisis. And because it was a crisis, generally you understand that some punishment is going to happen. But instead, he changed his whole attitude. All of a sudden, his world was no longer defined by what he could get away with, by what he could mark down in his books, by some transaction. His world was defined by a relationship. So what he did is he says, I can't dig, I can't beg, I know what I'll do. I'll make it so these people who hated me before will start liking me. Do you understand what happened? This was a crisis. God was at work with the manager. Even though it sounds very dicey, he suddenly realized that his importance was due to the relationships that he built with others. This is what the manager, what his owner congratulated him on, that he was shrewd, that he was shrewd by what he had accomplished. Think about what we've all been involved in these last weeks with all of the tragedy that's happening in the Bahamas. We have all been connected with the Bahamas. We're the Florida Bahamas Synod, after all. Our bishop is in the Bahamas right now. And we're trying to establish relationships with them. Those of us who were looking for parking spaces in the shade this morning know we have a higher calling. Because there are people, our brothers and sisters in our synod, our brothers and sisters who don't even have clothes on their backs. And so what do? We gather clothes, we gather money, we gather funds to be able to help them. We might never know where they're going. We might be doing quilts to go to disaster relief. We might be sending medicine. We might be doing all sorts of things to people who were strangers. But it's not about money, is it? It's not about things. It's not about a transaction. It's about a relationship. They're human beings. They are in need. Therefore, we help. So the manager had a crisis. And as a result of the crisis, he became a relator. He related to the people that he was cheating before. This constitutes a child of the light. The crisis brings about the change that happens. God, through Jesus Christ, has given us the ability to be children of the light. Thanks be to God. Amen.